Hello everyone, Ted Lacksonen, the country thinker here, ready to bring you another installment of The Eagle Has Crashed. This week before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about the economic and fiscal models that I created for this project. When I first got started, I really felt like I had to wrap my head around how bad our debt situation really is. So the first thing I did is I created fictitious economic models that look more or less like a mean average of the Bush and Clinton years with ups and downs and recessions and so on and so forth. And then I created fictitious fiscal models complete with spending by category and so on and so forth. And what I found is that to get our national debt to stay below 90% of GDP. And when I say national debt, I'm referring specifically to publicly held debt, which is the debt that we go out and into the market and actually borrow it, or the Federal Reserve borrows it, lends it to us, I should say. Anyhow, to keep our publicly held debt below 90% of GDP for 20 years was a very difficult thing to accomplish. Now, I specify 90% of GDP because that's based on the work of Maryland economist Carmen Reinhart and Harvard economist Kenneth Rogoff's work. They're the leading experts, you would say, in the area of sovereign debt, having researched literally thousands of instances of nations getting into trouble with their debt over the last few centuries. Now, the 90% mark isn't a fixed firm rule, but it definitely is a danger zone, and that's really what I was targeting. Anyhow, I wanted to get this story to take place about 20 years out because I wanted to clean Washington of all the names that we currently know, because I wanted readers, instead of thinking about the characters in Washington who bother them or they like or so on and so forth, I wanted everyone to just read the story and think about the ideas and think about the issues and not worry so much about the personalities. Once I completed the models, I had them reviewed by economist Dr. Robert P. Murphy, and this is what he had to say about them. Ted Lacksonen's scenario of a bleak U.S. economic future is based on quite conventional forecasts. If anything, I would say Lacksonen is too optimistic in his projections. Now, let me give you a sense of how optimistic these models actually ended up being. We're in fiscal year 2012, which began on October 1st of last year, and so this is realistically about the second year. My model is wrapped up in fiscal 2010, so this is the second year of the Eagle Has Crashed model stacking up against what's going on in the real world, and right now, this year's anticipated deficit is expected to be a little over 1.3 trillion, and in the Eagle Has Crashed, it was 763 billion, meaning reality has come in at about an 80% higher price tag than the one in the book. Now, if that doesn't get you a little concerned, I really don't know what will. So anyhow, that's the story about the economic and fiscal models for the Eagle Has Crashed. And let's get on to the story, and let's wrap up April of 2029. So, Danny, you can't really be serious about going back to Columbus, said a brown-haired man in his late 40s as he shoveled a fork full of home-canned green beans into his mouth. She scowled and tucked her long, chestnut hair behind her ear and poked at her pasta. Of course, why wouldn't I? Because you don't have a job, he said, staring at her with dark, deep-set eyes. Danny met her father's gaze. So what? She said. So I got downsized. It happens all the time. I'll get another job. I doubt it, he said as he twirled his fork in a pile of spaghetti. Although years of hard work had taught Tom Calhoun perseverance, his observations of the world had made him bitterly cynical. In response, he had purposely created a self-sufficient life, a process through which he had taught himself everything from macroeconomics to how to heat his home with methane captured from composting cow manure. His daughter rolled her eyes. Let me guess. This is another one of your gloom and doom predictions that the economy is going down the toilet. Danny turned to her mother, a buxom woman with long, straight black hair and blue eyes. Am I right, Mom? Her mother nodded. I'm afraid she's got you there, Tom. Your Grim Reaper predictions about the economy have never panned out. Although Megan took her daughter's side at this particular moment, It belied a persistent struggle between confidence in the status quo and the nagging worry that her husband's pessimistic views would someday come true. Danny laughed, and her father shook his head. "Megan, you know I'm right," he insisted. "I've said all along that the longer we put off the big one, the worse it will be." Megan leaned toward her daughter and shielded her mouth from her husband with the back of her hand. "You know men, always talking about the big one." Megan was proud of her image as a potty-mouthed redneck, which she learned as the only child of a single mother who worked as a waitress at a truck stop in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Danny put her hand over her mouth and emitted a cross between a laugh and a cough. "You almost made me barf, Mom. Stop!" "Very funny," Tom said, leaning back in his chair and folding his tanned, cable-muscled arms behind his head. "But I'm serious, Danny. I think it's a mistake to go back to Columbus thinking you'll find work. Dad, I'm 22, and I'm responsible for my decisions. I'm going back, and you're just going to have to live with it." Though built like a feminine replica of her father, lean, middle height, and toned, the young woman had absorbed little of his cynicism. Tom shook his head slowly and stroked his pointed chin. "You are one stubborn girl. You got way too much of your mama's Indian blood." Danny sat up straight and cupped her smallish breasts in her hands. "And I got way too little of her Swedish tits." Danny and her mother erupted laughing, the potty-mouth tradition passed on to the next generation. Tom rolled his dark brown eyes and chuckled. "You're a piece of work, sweetie, but let me warn you, things are going to get real tough down in Cowtown. You can bet on it." Danny scowled. "Then what do you want me to do, Dad? Stay here and milk cows, split wood, and clean solar panels? No way. I did enough of that shit growing up." "She's right, Tom," Megan said with a smile, revealing slightly yellow teeth from a smoking habit she had never fully kicked. "When I grew up, all I wanted to do was leave the UP. I did, and I don't regret it. I'd be fine going back now, but that's not the point. I had to get away. Danny needs to find her own way." Tom poked at the air with his fork. "I'll guarantee you that path is going to lead right back here. Things are going to get real nasty, and you aren't going to have any choice, Danny." Danny leaned back in the oak kitchen chair and put her hands on her hips. "Listen, I don't mind driving up here to see you guys, but get real, Dad. Living in the middle of nowhere in Licking County isn't all that exciting for someone my age. Columbus might be only an hour away, but it's a different world. I've got a bunch of friends down there, and it's my home now. You're just going to have to get used to it." "Yeah, but your timing is rotten," Tom said. Megan shook her head. "Tom Calhoun, maybe you're right and maybe you're not. That's not the point. Danny needs to get back to Columbus." "Thanks, Mom," Danny said. "And don't worry, Dad, I'll find a job." Her father swallowed a mouthful of cornbread. "So you say. Do you have any interviews lined up?" Danny's eyes darted to her plate. "No, not yet." Tom squinted and smiled slightly. "I've read the employment section of the Dispatch for years now, just to keep a sense of how things are going in the big city." He put his left elbow on the table and rested his chin on his knuckles. "That section is about half the size it was 6 months ago." Danny shrugged her shoulders. "So? I only need one job." Tom scratched his forehead. "You really don't see what's coming, do you?" She crossed her arms across her chest. "No, Dad, I don't." Lucy Davis swished into her cubicle, one of many in columns and rows that filled a cavernous office space at the State Unemployment Agency in downtown Columbus. Fluorescent lights hummed softly from the drop ceiling above. She tucked her flower-print skirt behind her legs and sat down in front of her monitor. She was reaching for her headset when she heard a soft rap on the metal frame of the entrance to her cubicle. "Lucy?" She spun in her chair and saw her supervisor, a tall, broad-shouldered black woman in a gray skirt suit, clutching a stack of manila envelopes. "Oh, hi, Miss Preston," Lucy said, with the polite formality of her Baptist upbringing. "Good morning," Serena Preston said with a smile. She handed the envelopes to Lucy. Lucy shuffled through the folders. "But Miss Preston, this is 7 more cases. I'm already booked solid." In her 14 years with the agency, Lucy's caseload had never risen as sharply as in the last month. Her boss shrugged. "I don't know what to tell you. When they come to our office, we have to serve them." Preston had made the same observation as Lucy, and she had been with the agency 22 years. "But I can't do as good of a job helping someone find work if I have to rush through it," Lucy protested. "It takes time to find the right match with an employer." Preston sighed. I understand, Lucy, but there are a lot of people showing up at our door, and you just have to do the best you can. I'm spreading the load around as much as I'm able. Lucy set the folders down on her keyboard and sighed. She looked back up to her boss and shook her head. I'll do my best, Miss Preston. That's all I'm asking, Lucy. Given the situation, I feel bad about asking this question, but can I work overtime? Preston nodded. Yeah, sure you can, but just don't overdo it. Lucy looked back down to her keyboard. Kevin lost his job 3 weeks ago, and his 30 days are almost up. It'll really help us out. Her boss frowned and put her hand on Lucy's back. I'm really sorry to hear that. Fortunately, your position is safe here. You do a great job. Oh, thanks, Miss Preston. That means a lot. Kevin's a good worker, too. It just looks like it's going to be hard to find him a new job. Preston pointed to the stack of folders. Most of those people are good workers. Lucy nodded. Yeah, I know. It stinks they're out of work. Hopefully it won't stay that way for long.